Have you ever built an empire, only to discover the parasites feeding on your blood consider you a stain? Never underestimate a woman who realizes her devotion was a joke. When cornered by your own flesh and blood, you do not scream. You simply step back, cut their safety rope, and watch them free fall. Listen closely. This is how I surgically remove the toxic tumor called family, and I promise the final twist will leave you breathless. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you for being such an incredible community. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to operate, meaning we will be forced to pause uploading new videos here in the near future and move our operations to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, longer, and feature highly detailed situations with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story as we follow the journey of Laurel Howell. I am 31 years old, and for the better part of my adult life, I have been the invisible engine powering a very shiny, very fake luxury vehicle, by day, and often by late into the night. I am a senior operations strategist at Apex Citadel Consulting in Boston. It is a title that requires 80 hours of grueling work every single week. I spend my life dissecting corporate inefficiencies, cutting dead weight, and streamlining operations for multinational conglomerates. I am ruthless at my job, and the firm rewards me handsomely for it. But my true full-time occupation has always been funding the grand, suffocating illusion of the Howell family. That illusion lives inside a breathtaking penthouse in Beacon Hill. It boasts floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the historic district, imported Italian marble countertops, and a monthly rent that could easily buy a luxury sedan outright. I do not live there. I rent a modest utilitarian apartment closer to the financial district, so I can walk to the office, but my signature is on that Beacon Hill lease as the sole guarantor, and my bank account automatically drains on the first day of every single month to keep a gilded roof over the heads of my mother, Vivian, and my older brother, Julian. Julian is the golden child. He is handsome, charismatic, and entirely useless. He runs a tech startup that has been hemorrhaging money for 5 consecutive years without launching a single viable product. Who patches up the bleeding? I do. I pour thousands of dollars of my hard-earned bonuses into his sinking ship because my mother constantly insists that creative geniuses simply need time to change the world. To Vivian, Julian is the undisputed pride of the Howell bloodline. She parades him around her high society charity galas like a prize stallion. He wears bespoke suits paid for by my credit card, charming old money widows with grand tales of his visionary software. And where am I during these lavish events? Usually sitting at my kitchen island, eating cold takeout, and staring at financial spreadsheets. My mother actively hides my profession. To the elite circles of Boston, I am just an ambiguous entity. Vivian tells her friends I do some boring administrative computer work. She thinks climbing the corporate ladder through pure grit is lowly. It lacks the aristocratic flair she so desperately craves. I have no husband, no pedigree, and no inherited wealth. So in her eyes, I am simply the hired help that happens to share her last name. For years, I accepted this toxic dynamic. I thought it was my duty. I thought blood meant sacrifice. That delusion shattered into a million pieces on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had returned home to Boston early from a draining business trip in Chicago. My flight landed 3 hours ahead of schedule, instead of going straight to my apartment to sleep. I took a cab directly to the Beacon Hill penthouse to drop off a custom silk scarf my mother had relentlessly begged me to buy for her from a boutique. I unlocked the heavy oak door as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb her if she was resting. The grand foyer was perfectly silent, save for the muffled sound of my mother's voice coming from the den. The thick wooden door was left slightly ajar. I walked closer, intending to push it open and say hello, but my feet stopped dead on the plush hallway runner. Vivian was on a charity board. Zoom meeting, or rather, the official meeting had just ended, but she had forgotten to mute her microphone or disconnect her session. She was on a private follow-up call with one of her snobby socialite friends, holding a crystal glass of Chardonnay, looking completely relaxed in the home I paid for. I peered through the narrow crack in the door. The air in the hallway felt like it had dropped 20 degrees as her words drifted out. "She is a burden, a big failure," Vivian sighed, taking a delicate sip of her expensive wine. "Sometimes I wish I had never borne her. She embarrasses me so much. 31 years old, no husband, no social status, just burying her head to earn a few meager paychecks. Thankfully, I have Julian to make up for it." She laughed. It was a light, airy, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "My own mother called my blood, my sweat, my endless 80-hour work weeks, a few meager paychecks. She used the very money I bled for to buy the wine she was currently drinking, all while telling her wealthy friends she wished I did not exist. Most people would kick the door open. Most people would scream, cry, throw the expensive silk scarf in her face, and demand an explanation for the cruelty, but I did not. The initial shock lasted only a fraction of a second before my mind completely froze. The burning sting of betrayal evaporated, replaced instantly by a chilling, terrifying clarity. It was as if a switch had been flipped in the darkest, most calculating corner of my brain. I did not make a single sound. I stood there in the shadows, my breathing perfectly controlled, my face completely blank. I looked at the extravagant chandelier above me and the Persian rug beneath my feet, acknowledging for the final time that all of it was built on my exhaustion. Then, I slowly backed away. I retreated down the hall, opened the front door, and slipped out into the cold Boston rain without anyone ever knowing I was there. I drove straight through the pouring rain to the upscale townhouse of my best friend, Harper. She is a razor-sharp financial attorney, the kind of woman who can spot a hidden offshore asset from a continent away. When I rang her doorbell, she opened it wearing silk pajamas, a look of immediate concern flooding her face. She expected tears. She expected a breakdown. Women in my position usually fall apart, but my eyes were completely dry. The person standing on her porch was not a grieving daughter. It was a senior operations strategist assessing a massive corporate security breach. "I need a covert forensic audit on every single family account," I said, stepping past her into the dry warmth of her foyer. "Tonight." Harper did not ask unnecessary questions. She brewed a pot of strong black coffee, booted up her dual-monitor workstation in her home office, and we went to work. Years ago, in a blind haze of filial trust, I had signed a broad power of attorney over a specific trust fund I had established to cover the family's living expenses. I funded it directly from my corporate bonuses, allowing my mother to manage the day-to-day payments for her penthouse and my brother's endless startup capital. It was a fatal flaw in my own operational security. As Harper bypassed the surface-level ledgers and dug into the encrypted transactional histories, the true architecture of their deception began to materialize on the glowing screens. My brother was not a struggling, misunderstood entrepreneur. He was a highly successful thief. Harper traced the cash flow from his tech startup with terrifying precision. The money I had been injecting into his company was not going towards software development, payroll, or marketing. Instead, it was being immediately funneled through a labyrinth of shell corporations based in the Caribbean. From there, the funds were meticulously split. One half was quietly purchasing high-end, private real estate under an anonymous limited liability company. He owned a luxury beachfront condo down in Florida and a remote ski cabin in Colorado, all paid for with my sweat. The other half was vanishing into the shadowy abyss of exclusive, high-stakes underground casinos. He was bleeding me dry, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, to fund a secret life of extreme luxury and gambling addictions. But the most devastating blow did not come from my brother's greed. It came from my mother's digital footprint. While scrubbing the linked accounts, Harper managed to access a thread of archived emails between Vivian and Julian. My mother knew everything. In fact, she was the primary orchestrator of the entire embezzlement scheme. I sat frozen in Harper's leather chair as I read their exchanges. When my brother needed another massive injection of cash to cover a catastrophic poker loss, Vivian was the one who fabricated the stories to extract the funds from me. I saw the digital receipts for the fake cardiology treatments she claimed she desperately needed last winter. I saw the forged invoices for the imaginary legal disputes she said were threatening their elite social standing. She had meticulously crafted every single crisis, playing on my sense of duty and fear of losing her, just to siphon more blood from my veins. Suddenly, the horrific words I had overheard earlier that afternoon took on a much darker, much more sinister meaning. When my mother called me a burden and a massive failure to her society friends, it was not merely an expression of embarrassment. It was a highly calculated psychological weapon. By constantly belittling me, by making me feel like an ugly duckling who could never measure up to the family's fictional pedigree, she kept me trapped in a perpetual cycle of guilt. She made me believe that my only value was financial. The more inadequate I felt, the harder I worked, and the more money I blindly handed over to buy her elusive approval. I was not her daughter. I was her captive. Unlimited bank account. Harper slammed her fist on the mahogany desk, rattling our coffee mugs. This is felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and a dozen other federal financial crimes, she snarled, her eyes burning with raw fury. We are calling the authorities right now. I will personally see them locked in a federal penitentiary for the next 15 to 20 years. I looked at the damning evidence on the screen, feeling an eerie, absolute calm wash over my entire body. The pain was completely gone, replaced by a razor-sharp, clinical rage. I reached out and gently pushed Harper's hand away from her cell phone. No, I said softly, staring at the financial spreadsheets. The police are far too easy. Prison gives them 3 square meals a day and a roof over their heads. It gives my mother the opportunity to play the tragic, betrayed victim to the press. Laurel, they systematically stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from you, Harper argued, throwing her hands up in disbelief. They belong behind bars, and I am going to take away something far more valuable to them than money or freedom, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. If I put them in jail, they will still have their arrogant pride. They will still think they are fundamentally better than me. I want to strip them of the only things they actually worship. I want to take their high society status, their unearned luxury, and their pristine public reputation, and I want to burn it all to the ground while they are forced to watch. Harper stared at me for a long moment, seeing the absolute zero temperature in my eyes. She slowly lowered her phone. A slow, dangerous smile crept across her face, realizing exactly what kind of war I was declaring. Tell me exactly what you need, she whispered. Right then and there, as the sun began to rise over the Boston skyline, we began drafting my exit plan. It was not a chaotic, emotional revenge scheme. It was a flawless, legally bulletproof demolition strategy, designed with the exact same ruthless corporate precision I used to dismantle failing multinational conglomerates. We were going to cut off the financial oxygen to their glittering little empire, remaining completely undetected, until they suffocated on their own toxic lies. I walked into the executive boardroom of Apex Citadel Consulting at exactly 8 o'clock the following morning. I did not respectfully ask for a transfer. I leveraged my entire high-performing portfolio to demand one. The firm had just opened a massive new branch in Seattle, and they desperately needed a senior operations strategist to structure the regional hierarchy. I stood before the board of directors and told them I would take the position effective immediately, but under one absolute, non-negotiable condition. My relocation had to remain strictly classified. There would be no internal company memos, no updated corporate directories, and absolutely no forwarding address or contact information left on file at the Boston headquarters. Knowing my immense value to the company's bottom line, the board agreed instantly. For the next 4 weeks, my life transformed into a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization to the naked eye. I was still the obedient, perpetually exhausted workhorse keeping the family afloat. The contrast between what I knew and how I acted was a delicate, high-wire performance. I continued to attend our mandatory Sunday dinners at the Beacon Hill penthouse. I sat across the sprawling mahogany dining table, sipping sparkling water, and listened with a warm, sympathetic smile as my brother spun extravagant, theatrical lies about his tech company. The market is just incredibly hostile right now. Julian sighed, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon. We are so close to a breakthrough. Laurel, I just need another $50,000 for a bridge loan to make it through the quarter. If we lose momentum now, the whole vision collapses. He looked at me with those perfectly practiced, desperate eyes, the exact same eyes he used right before transferring my money to an offshore shell company. My mother immediately chimed in, leaning across the table and patting my hand with her cold, perfectly manicured fingers. Family supports family. Darling, she cooed, the diamonds on her tennis bracelet catching the chandelier light. Julian is on the verge of changing the world. We all have to make sacrifices to support his genius. I looked at the bracelet I had paid for. I looked at the tailored suit Julian wore, bought with my credit line. A cold, dark amusement blossomed in my chest. I smiled back at them, cutting my steak with surgical precision. Do not worry about a thing, I told them in a soft, reassuring voice. I am handling everything. And I truly was, behind their backs. The demolition was moving at the aggressive speed of a hostile corporate takeover. Harper was a tactical genius. Treating my family like a corrupt corporation, we were liquidating. First, we targeted their impenetrable fortress. The luxury penthouse lease was an ironclad contract, but it hinged entirely on my financial backing as the sole guarantor. Harper contacted the high-end property management conglomerate and formally withdrew my guarantor status, presenting legally binding documentation of a complete cessation of financial support. Because neither Vivian nor Julian had any verifiable income, let alone the stellar credit score required to maintain a multi-million-dollar property. The landlord immediately panicked. We quietly orchestrated a seamless legal agreement. The lease would officially terminate on the final day of the current month. The landlord secretly drafted the formal eviction notice, having his elite legal team ready to serve the papers the very second the clock struck midnight. Next came the lifeblood. I systematically dismantled the financial pipelines that kept their hollow, glittering empire inflated. With Harper guiding the complex legal parameters, I froze the primary family trust fund, locking the massive capital reserves behind thick layers of bureaucratic red tape that Julian would never be able to penetrate or contest. Then, I logged into my secure banking portal and targeted the ultra-exclusive supplementary black card my mother carried everywhere in her Prada purse. I did not cancel it immediately. That would have tipped them off too soon and allowed them to formulate a desperate backup plan. Instead, I programmed the bank's automated security system to terminate the card at precisely 12 o'clock in the afternoon on the first day of the new month. I wanted the financial guillotine to drop exactly when she was surrounded by her wealthy peers. I then turned my attention to the vehicles. Julian drove two luxury sports cars, a Porsche 911 and a custom Porsche Cayenne, both legally registered in my name, to secure the favorable corporate loan rates. I simply stopped the auto payments and contacted the bank's aggressive asset recovery division. I handed over the exact GPS coordinates of the private Beacon Hill parking garage, provided the entry gate codes, and authorized a total, immediate repossession for the early hours of the first of the month. Extracting my physical presence from the penthouse was the easiest phase of the entire operation. I had never taken up much space in their self-absorbed world to begin with. Over the course of the final 2 weeks, I packed my life away in the dead of night. My mother was far too preoccupied with organizing her elite charity tea parties and booking extravagant spa appointments to notice the subtle changes. She never noticed that my winter coats were vanishing from the hallway closet. She did not realize the antique silver clock my late grandmother left me was suddenly missing from the living room mantelpiece. Everything I owned, everything that actually held sentimental value to me, was quietly boxed up and shipped 2,500 miles away to the Pacific Northwest. The final evening arrived under a blanket of heavy, freezing Boston rain. The penthouse was completely silent. My mother was out attending a high-profile gala, and Julian was supposedly working a late shift at his office. which I now knew meant he was burning thousands of dollars at an underground blackjack table. I stood in the center of the grand foyer for the very last time, wearing a simple trench coat and holding a single leather carry-on suitcase. I walked into Julian's home office. On the center of his massive, untouched glass desk, I placed a bright red folder. I made sure it was positioned perfectly under the desk lamp, completely impossible to miss. I did not leave a long, emotional letter. Pouring out my broken heart, I did not demand apologies or offer explanations. I simply turned around, walked out the heavy oak door, and let the locking mechanism click shut with a definitive thud. I rode the private elevator down to the marble lobby, stepped out into the waiting cab, and told the driver to head straight to Logan International Airport. The silent demolition was fully executed. The charges were planted. The timers were ticking, and I was safely walking away before the entire structure collapsed. The morning of the first of the month arrived crisp and bright as my flight touched down in Seattle. Before even stepping off the plane, I pulled the old SIM card from my phone, snapped the tiny piece of plastic precisely in half, and dropped the fragments into a terminal trash can. Location tracking was permanently disabled. The digital tether to my past was entirely severed. I took a private car directly to my brand new apartment. Walking inside, the space was vast, minimalist, and completely silent, featuring massive windows framing a breathtaking view of the sparkling bay. I stood in the center of the living room and inhaled deeply. For the very first time in my adult life, I took a breath of air that did not smell like guilt, fabricated obligation, or suffocating expectations. It was the pure, weightless scent of absolute freedom. 2,500 miles away, the storm I had meticulously engineered was just making landfall, at exactly noon, Boston time. My mother was standing in an exclusive designer boutique on Newbury Street. She was surrounded by three of her wealthiest, most judgmental socialite friends, holding a glass of complimentary champagne. She casually handed over her sleek black supplementary card to purchase a $15,000 Hermes handbag, intending to show off her limitless wealth. The cashier smiled politely and swiped the card. Then she swiped it again. The machine beeped a harsh, unforgiving, and very loud tone. "I am sorry, madam, but this card has been declined," the cashier announced, her voice echoing perfectly in the quiet, luxurious room. Vivian's confident, aristocratic smile instantly froze. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand dismissively and claiming it was merely a ridiculous banking error, but the damage was already done. The whispers among her friends started immediately, their eyes darting to the rejected card and the handbag she suddenly could not afford. The first devastating crack in her pristine social armor had appeared, exposing the fake gold beneath. Back at the Beacon Hill penthouse, Julian was nursing a severe hangover from another night of high-stakes gambling. He grabbed his keys and rode the private elevator down to the underground parking garage, intending to drive to a late brunch to clear his head. He stepped out of the elevator doors and froze in his tracks. His designated premium parking spots were completely empty. The custom luxury vehicles he paraded around town were gone, legally towed by the aggressive asset recovery team hours before the sun even came up. He stood alone in the damp, oily air of the garage, frantically pressing the panic button on his key fob, met only with dead silence and the crushing realization that he was stranded. The true, devastating blow arrived exactly an hour later. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the grand foyer of the penthouse. Vivian, who had just rushed home, seething from her public humiliation at the boutique, jerked the heavy oak door open. She expected to unleash her fury on a delivery driver. Instead, she found the senior building manager standing in the hallway, flanked by a burly security guard. The manager did not offer his usual warm, deferential greeting. He handed her a thick, legally binding document. It was a formal notice to vacate the premises within 72 hours. He explained in a cold, strictly professional tone that the guarantor had formally withdrawn all financial backing. The automated rent payments were permanently frozen, and her tenancy was legally terminated. There was no room for negotiation. Panic finally set in, thick and suffocating. Vivian shrieked for Julian, who had just stormed back upstairs from the empty garage in a blind panic. In the chaotic frenzy of trying to figure out what was happening, Julian ran into his home office to check his financial documents. That was when he saw the bright red folder sitting perfectly centered under his desk lamp. He ripped it open. There were no long letters of explanation. There were no emotional pleas. There was only a single, thickly stapled stack of papers detailing every single illicit transfer, every offshore shell company, and every underground casino deposit he had ever made with my money. Attached to the very front page was a small sticky note with 3 handwritten words. Enjoy the reality. Back in Seattle, the sun was beginning to set over the shimmering water, casting a warm golden glow across my new living room. I poured myself a generous glass of robust red wine, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and powered on a secondary, burner phone I had synced to my old cloud account purely for observation. The screen instantly lit up like a frantic alarm. There were 68 missed calls and dozens of panicked, borderline hysterical voicemails. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. I read through the desperate text messages one by one, watching their artificial reality crumble in real time. My mother was begging, demanding, and threatening all at once, completely unhinged. Julian was pleading for me to answer, realizing his entire criminal enterprise was fully exposed. I felt no pity. I felt no regret. With a perfectly steady hand, I pressed the delete all button, watching their digital panic vanish into absolute nothingness, and I did not even blink. When a parasite loses its host, it does not simply starve quietly, it thrashes, panics, and eventually turns on its own kind. My mother's very first instinct was to manipulate the public narrative. 2 days after receiving the formal eviction notice, she took to her social media accounts to perform the role she believed she was born to play, which was the tragic, long-suffering victim. She posted a lengthy, tear-soaked essay detailing how her supposedly unhinged daughter had suffered a severe mental breakdown, inexplicably abandoning her vulnerable, aging mother and hardworking brother in their darkest hour. She tagged dozens of her wealthy friends, subtly begging for emergency personal loans and temporary luxury housing. She painted herself as a heartbroken martyr who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful, unstable child. But Harper was already 10 steps ahead of her digital pity party, hours before Vivian even hit the publish button on her fabricated sob story. Harper utilized a secure, untraceable server to send a mass email to every single contact in my mother's phone book. The recipient list included the entire board of directors for her beloved high society charity, the elite governing members of her exclusive country club, and every snobby socialite who had ever sneered at my career. The email contained no dramatic accusations and no emotional rants. It only contained cold, hard, indisputable attachments. It featured Julian's underground casino ledgers, the offshore shell company registrations, and the forged medical invoices my mother had personally drafted to steal my money. The social execution was instantaneous and absolute. The charity board did not even invite Vivian to a formal disciplinary hearing. They held an emergency remote vote and officially expelled her via a brutal, 2-minute phone call, demanding she return her organizational badge by mail. Her high society friends, utterly terrified of being publicly associated with a massive federal fraud scandal, blocked her phone number entirely. The glittering, arrogant world she had worshipped all her life slammed its heavy doors in her face, locking her outside in the freezing cold. Meanwhile, Julian was facing a much more terrifying reality than mere social exile. The sudden exposure of his hidden Caribbean accounts and his massive, untaxed gambling deposits had triggered multiple red flags within the Internal Revenue Service. Federal investigators were circling his fraudulent tech startup like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Looking at the very real prospect of serving 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and tax evasion. My brother completely panicked. Julian had never fought a real battle in his entire life. Whenever he made a mistake, he simply hid behind my mother's skirts, waiting for my hard-earned money to make the consequences miraculously disappear. Now, with his bank accounts frozen and his financial safety net completely gone. The golden child did exactly what cowards do best. He turned on the only person left standing next to him, in a desperate, pathetic bid to save his own skin. Julian marched into the district attorney's office alongside a defense lawyer he had hired using the absolute last of his hidden cash. He sat across from aggressive federal prosecutors and offered them a spectacular plea deal. He handed over a massive digital flash drive containing 5 years of private emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls between him and Vivian. "She forced me to do it," Julian told the federal authorities, his voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed remorse. "My mother orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. She fabricated the fake medical bills. She told me exactly what lies to tell to extract the funds from my sister. I was just following her strict instructions." He sold out the woman who had worshipped the ground he walked on since birth, tossing her directly into the path of a massive federal indictment, all to secure a reduced sentence for his own financial crimes. When the 72 hours officially expired, the county sheriff arrived at the Beacon Hill penthouse. Vivian was physically escorted out of the grand marble lobby, dragging 2 heavy suitcases containing whatever designer clothes she could frantically stuff inside before the locks were changed. With her credit cards permanently declined and her wealthy friends vanishing into thin air, she had absolutely nowhere to go. She ended up checking into a dingy, dimly lit motel on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was a miserable place where the neon sign flickered outside the window, and the carpet smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and deep despair. She sat on the edge of a sagging, stained mattress, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. Her phone finally rang, but it was not one of her elite friends calling to rescue her. It was a local journalist, asking for an official comment on her son's recent plea agreement with the federal government. That was the exact moment the ultimate, agonizing truth finally settled into her bones. The brilliant, visionary son she had relentlessly championed, the golden boy for whom she had gleefully destroyed her own daughter, was the very person who drove the final nail into her coffin. Without my money to cushion his reality, Julian did not hesitate to slit her throat to save himself. They were now completely alone, trapped in a miserable prison of their own making, forced to tear each other apart just to survive. 6 months can completely rewrite a human life. Today, I am no longer a shadowed, exhausted workhorse. I am the managing director of Apex Citadel's Pacific Northwest Division. Tonight, the firm was hosting a spectacular black tie gala at a grand waterfront hotel in downtown Seattle, entirely dedicated to honoring my successful launch of the new regional branch. Hundreds of elite partners, tech executives, and industry leaders filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the immaculate tables. I stood at the podium in a tailored, emerald green evening gown, finishing my keynote speech to a roaring round of applause. I had never felt more powerful, more respected, or more secure in my entire existence. Then, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom violently crashed open. The music abruptly stopped. The polite chatter died in the throats of the guests. I looked out over the sea of bewildered faces and saw her. My mother, Vivian, had somehow scraped together the absolute last of her remaining dimes to purchase a cross-country plane ticket. She bypassed the front desk and managed to slip past the event staff. The woman charging down the center aisle was completely unrecognizable from the pristine, arrogant socialite of Beacon Hill. Her hair was frantic and unkempt. She wore a wrinkled, outdated trench coat, and her eyes were wild with cornered desperation. She had come to stage a massive, theatrical extortion attempt. She knew I had a reputation to protect here, surrounded by my peers and superiors. She calculated that if she caused a catastrophic public scene, if she humiliated me deeply enough in front of high society, I would immediately write a massive check to save my brother from his looming prison sentence and reinstate her luxurious lifestyle just to make her go away. "Look at her!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger directly at me on the stage. She collapsed to her knees in the middle of the aisle, sobbing uncontrollably. "Look at the monster standing up there. I gave you life. I sacrificed my youth for you. And you abandoned your own mother to starve in the streets. You left your innocent brother to rot. How can you stand there in diamonds while your flesh and blood is utterly destroyed? Have you absolutely no shame? Give us what we need. Gasps echoed through the room. Several high-profile investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Two massive security guards immediately rushed forward from the shadows, reaching out to grab her arms and drag her out of the venue. "Stop," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly through the lapel microphone. The guards instantly froze, stepping back into the shadows. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. I did not panic. I did not blush with shame. I walked down the carpeted stairs of the stage with the slow, deliberate majesty of an absolute queen holding court. I crossed the marble floor until I was standing just a few feet away from the woman sobbing loudly into her hands. I did not waste my breath arguing with her. I simply smiled. It was a gentle, terrifyingly calm smile. I reached into my evening clutch, pulled out my smartphone, and connected it instantly to the ballroom's master Bluetooth audio system. I pressed play on a voice memo I had secretly recorded on my phone while standing in the hallway exactly 6 months ago. Suddenly, my mother's own voice boomed from the massive concert speakers mounted around the room. It was crisp, arrogant, and laced with pure venom. "She is a burden, a big failure," the recorded Vivian sighed smoothly, the clinking of her crystal wine glass perfectly audible. "Sometimes I wish I had never borne her. She embarrasses me so much. 31 years old, no husband, no social status, just burying her head to earn a few meager paychecks. Thankfully, I have Julian to make up for it." The audio cut off. The ensuing silence in the ballroom was so absolute, so heavy. You could hear the rain lashing against the glass windows. Vivian's theatrical sobbing instantly stopped. Her mouth hung open in absolute horror. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, meeting the faces of hundreds of executives and elites. She found no pity. She found no sympathy. She found only profound, undisguised disgust. While she was paralyzed by her own public destruction, I stepped forward. I crouched down to her level and pressed a crisp, red-stamped envelope directly into her trembling hands. It was an official court summons from the Internal Revenue Service before leaving Boston. I had not just frozen the accounts. I had submitted a comprehensive, meticulously documented whistleblower report to the federal government detailing every single instance of her tax evasion. I leaned in close, ensuring my voice was low enough that only she could hear my final verdict. "You were right, Mother," I whispered smoothly into her ear. "You never should have borne me, because I am the exact person who will permanently end your fraudulent career. The game is over." Vivian looked at the federal seal on the envelope. Her face drained of all remaining color. Turning the shade of ash, she scrambled backward on the marble floor, completely terrified, clutching the summons to her chest. She scrambled to her feet and turned around. She did not scream anymore. She ran. She fled through the heavy wooden doors and out into the stormy Seattle night, chased only by the blistering silence and the contempt of everyone she had just tried to manipulate. I stood up, smoothing the front of my gown. I walked back to my designated table, taking my seat beside my respected colleagues. I raised a crystal glass of champagne. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by awe and quiet admiration. We toasted to the new division. I looked out the massive windows at the beautiful Seattle rain, officially closing the heavy iron door on my past. There was no forgiveness to be found here, and there never would be. There was only perfect, surgical justice, and an eternity of absolute freedom. Thank you so incredibly much for listening to my story today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know in the comments. I also want to take a moment to say a very sincere and polite thank you to our amazing audience. As we mentioned earlier, since YouTube has disabled our monetization, we are left without a budget and will sadly have to stop uploading new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us out, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your wonderful support, and have a beautiful day.